Because a lot of the problem with introversion is when you're just dropped into a room or you're just dropped onto the internet and told, meet people. It's a sequence over strategy problem. There's 10 steps you should take before you get dropped into that space. And when we're just dropped in that space without any of that preparation, we panic, understandably, because I'm not getting into a small room and figuring out how to make small talk with people. But if I have an assignment and if I know what I'm there, honestly, I'm still probably going to skip the event because there are better ways to do it. But if I have a purpose for reaching out to someone, I can reach out to them. It's when I'm just told to vaguely go meet people that it gets real ugly.
Hello, and welcome to episode 212 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts, along with strategies for success. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we'll air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review or a rating. That would mean a lot to me and also help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Michelle Warner designs tiny companies that are built for the long run. With an MBA from one of the world's top business schools and 15 plus years growing small businesses, Michelle knows how to help you diagnose and fix what's not working while designing a new iteration of your business that will work for you. She's also the creator of Networking That Pays, the introvert-friendly, always awkward-free connection system that delivers reliable leads, consistent referrals, and meaningful connections. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Michelle. Michelle, it's so great to have you on today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and as I was telling you, I heard you on a different podcast, and you were just talking about building networks and building relationships, how important it was, but in an introverted manner, a way that really works for introverts because we want to build relationships. We need to build relationships, but maybe our extroverted colleague or friend, they're going to do it a different way.
That's exactly the thing. It's different. And I think a lot of times introverts then think it's maybe not possible because you see the extroverts, they're very visible and very energetic. And so we end up labeling that as the correct way to do it. And let me tell you, extroverts kind of screw up building their network as well. And so there's nothing magical over there. And it is just different approaches.
Yeah. So let's start with that. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey, when you figured out you were an introvert, and how you got to the work you're doing today.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't remember a time when I didn't know I was an introvert. I don't know if I always had a label for it, but it's just how I've always operated. And how I got to where I am now was I was in very traditional marketing, mass marketing for a lot of my career in both higher education, nonprofit, small business development, went and got my MBA at the University of Chicago. And when I did that, I got involved in entrepreneurship, ended up after I graduated right into the Great Recession. So it was not a great time to be coming out with an MBA degree, but I had a great opportunity to go be a founder for hire, essentially. A long story short, a foundation had some assets that they wanted a business created out of. So they hired me as a tech startup founder, which is weird to be hired into that role, but through a nonprofit scheme, I kind of was. So I was a very normal looking tech startup executive and founder for about 5 or 6 years. And then that company was doing really well, and I like the early messy stages. So I left that in some very capable hands. They are still killing it, and went on my own about 10, 12 years ago.
So you kind of fell into what you're doing now.
A little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, my customers from my tech startup showed me a little bit of this world of really small solo businesses. And I got really interested in it and thought, hey, I have been in business development, building businesses for at that point, 10, 15 years. And I thought I can really help these folks who have a skill and are going out on their own, but don't necessarily know how to sustainably run the actual business part of it.
Yeah. So you call the work that you're doing sequence over strategy. You also have a podcast by the same name. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's just my overarching belief is that the order in which you do things is more important than how well you do any of them. So you could have the most brilliant podcast, you could have the most brilliant course or the most brilliant content, whatever. If you're not deploying that in the right order of your business development cycles, it's not going to do as much as it could. It's not that it won't do anything, but a lot of times we get caught up in those upper level strategies. Oh, I see this thing working really well for somebody. I always laugh about like dancing on TikTok or whatever strategy it might be. We glom onto these marketing or product strategies and get really caught up in those. And then we wonder if they're not perfect. And a lot of times they're not perfect because you didn't have a bunch of the foundation in place. You didn't do it in the right order. So I talk a lot about that sequence over strategy, just reminding folks, look a little bit below the surface, look at your foundation before you chase every shiny object that's out there.
Yeah. Do you have any examples you could share about that?
Yeah, it's really common for somebody one of my favorites is that they get confused in their marketing. So I talk about every marketing strategy that you could have lays on a continuum between what I call relationship marketing or traffic marketing. And traffic marketing is the really visible marketing we see. You're on social media, it's kind of mass marketing. You're trying to find a lot of people. Relationship marketing is more built in relationships. And it's much more of a one-to-one or one-to-a-few approach. And a lot of times somebody who might have a service-based business or something that would be well served by relationship marketing, because you don't need a ton of leads, right? Maybe you need 50 leads to close 10 pieces of business a year. You don't need thousands of them. So if you're in that service-based business, a lot of times you're living on referrals. And then you decide, oh, I should do more. I should probably start some marketing so that I'm more in control of my business. And then what happens is all of a sudden they completely overcorrect and skip all the other relationship marketing strategies they might have available to them, mostly because we don't talk about it very often. And they go all the way over to mass marketing. And they start trying to build a list and email that list daily or dance on TikTok or create 100,000 followers on LinkedIn, whatever it may be. And then those people still aren't buying the services package because people who are randomly following you on LinkedIn are not going to buy a $50,000 B2B corporate consulting contract. And so that's what we're talking about. Like if you start chasing those strategies, if you're just a service provider feeling this urge, like, oh my gosh, I better start marketing. And you don't think in terms of sequence. And instead you just start grabbing any strategy you see out there. It's highly likely you're going to grab the wrong strategies. Where if we talk in sequence, first we're going to say, okay, where am I on that marketing continuum of, where do I lay? Am I kind of a relationship person? Am I a traffic person? And then what strategies match for that? And that is a way that you're going to save yourself a lot of time and grief, right? It's not like you're never going to make a sale if your marketing is misaligned. You're going to get lucky here and there. But in the business world, we call it like there's too much noise in your model or inefficiency. You're doing way too much work to achieve those sales. Whereas if we can get you aligned and ask that question first of what are the marketing strategies that are in alignment for you, you're just going to make progress faster. And we're going to level out that entrepreneurial roller coaster.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to talk about this. I think sometimes people think in this example, people think, oh, well, I have to have millions of connections. And you really don't. You really
No,
have to have the right connections with, the right number and that kind of thing.
absolutely. Yep.
So I was going to ask you about social media because I did hear you talk about some myths around that. Do you want to share any more about misunderstandings about social media?
I think my biggest one is to just not default into the fact that you absolutely need it. That's number one is people just assume you need social media. You need to be out there. Maybe you do, but a lot of times you don't, or a lot of times you can use it in a way that makes more sense for your business. Again, I'm on social media, but you will very rarely see me post publicly. But I am in the DMs talking to people and messaging. That's how you and I connected, I think, for the first time. And that's just using it in a different way and recognizing it is a vehicle to be in touch with people. It doesn't need to be a vehicle to gather 100,000 followers.
Right. Yeah. And you're not going to see me dancing on TikTok, that's for sure.
Exactly. Exactly. And so many people don't feel aligned with social media, but feel like they need to do it. And there is a good possibility that you don't.
Yeah. But that message is out there. You need to do this. You need to do that. And not
You know why?
necessarily.
Because it's I know we're going to talk about this. It's kind of like extroverts. You see it. It's easy to see. And it's also easy to teach people. It's very easy to Google, how should I market? And get a list of the 10 things you need to be active on LinkedIn. It is much harder to teach people how to build relationships or how to do some of the more nuanced activity. I can't tell you how many people I talk to who say, "Oh, I'm really active on LinkedIn, so my marketing is going great." And then I say, "Well, are you selling anything?" And they say, "No, but I post as many times a week as I said I was going to." And I have to say, well, it's not working. I mean,
Right.
congratulations on getting your work done, but we need to recognize that it's not working. And I think that weirdly gets lost in the sauce because it's so easy to set up a checklist of how many times a week do I need to post? What do I need to post? That when that checklist is complete, it's like, oh, good, my marketing is done and working. And we weirdly forget to ask, did you get any business from it? Because if you're not, we need to talk about that.
Yeah. So how do you help your clients work through the right questions to make the right sequence?
Well, there's a whole process that I use. It's rooted in 5 stages of small business growth, which is some research that came out of Harvard in the early 80s. I've adapted that for what super small businesses look like in the year 2025. But there's 5 stages that every business kind of goes through in terms of what you need to be worried about at any one time. And the second stage is a stage I call sales. And that just means you are looking to create repeatable and reliable marketing and sales. And the process of that becomes looking at where am I on the marketing continuum? Should I be relationship marketing or should I be traffic marketing? Is that in alignment with my product mix? Is that in alignment with the customers that I say I want? And so we have a whole system where we look at, I call them dials, like the dial of your product mix, the dial of your customer niche, the dial of your marketing need to be set in ways that they are in alignment with each other. I think about washing machines. It's a random analogy, but I think a lot of us can relate. If you have a delicate cycle, you're probably, if that dial is turned to delicates, you're probably not turning the heat knob to, high heat. You're probably going to wash that in cold. And if you do the opposite, they're not in alignment. And the same thing can happen with your product mix and your customers and your marketing mix. Different customers respond to different types of marketing, respond to different products. And so that's where we start as we kind of get those virtual, dials out and say, is this in alignment or is it not? And if it's not, then we start being able to see options of how to fix that, because you can look at what's not in alignment and say, okay, I want to change this dial so that it comes into alignment with the other two.
Yeah. And you talk about all these topics on your podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
I do. I have a podcast called Sequence Over Strategy, as you said. It's a little different than most podcasts. It's not an interview show. I think about it as a resource library for folks who've heard me talk about some of these things and want to go a little bit deeper. So every episode is just 20 to 30 minutes. It's monologue of me walking through different questions I get from my audience. And applying those to these frameworks we're talking about. And so my hope is if we get real world questions from folks, and then we talk about, okay, how do we actually address that? I'm not getting leads, or I don't want to use social media, or we have a lot of specific questions that come in. I walk you through how I would think through that question in terms of sequence over strategy. So instead of just giving you a quick answer, we're going to walk through my decision-making process to help people both get answers and to hopefully start training brains to think in a little bit of a different direction.
Yeah. And so you always have like real world scenarios that you're using?
Yeah. Yeah. So people submit questions, or
Okay.
sometimes I take questions that I just hear over and over and over again from my audience, because I do a lot of open forums where people can come in for Q&As. But yeah, it's always rooted in a real world scenario, usually a very, one specific question that's coming in for a business, but I'm not afraid to throw out some aggregate questions that I hear all the time if I know that will help.
Okay. So, as an introvert, is there any myths you want to bust about being a podcast host?
I think it's one of the easiest things, to me, and your experience may be different, but my experience as an introvert has been that I am very good one-on-one or one-to-many. It is that small group stuff that gets really weird for me. And so you put me in a room where I can just talk to my people and feel like I'm, talking to a room and helping them. that's easy for me. It's, when you start suggesting I might need to facilitate small groups or any of that, that's where my introversion starts coming out in a very big way. But that one to many has never been an issue for me, whether it's in public or, from behind a microphone. I get really energized by that. And then I go sleep for the rest of the day. I mean, that's a whole nother, but in that moment, I find it to be a really energizing thing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big myth right there is people say things like, "Oh, introverts, they don't have anything to say." I'm like, "No, we have a lot to say because we're always thinking."
Absolutely.
But
Yep.
when we have the one to many, like a podcast or a speech, we're sharing our thoughts, and and if we prepare correctly and also manage our energy, we can do very well in that situation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we also thrive in the one-on-one. So
Hmm.
it's not that we don't like people because we absolutely do, but it's just like we like certain situations and connections, and it's, don't put me in the room of 100 strangers and expect me to bounce around from person to person because that's not going to work for me very well.
Yeah, agree 100%. And we're also usually really good listeners or processors. And I think one thing I have learned is to not feel the need to constantly have something to say, right? If you are, and in a one on one conversation, obviously that's a little different. But if you are like in a small group situation, because it's going to happen, and I'm probably not going to be in charge of that, or I'm going to do everything I can to not be in charge of it. But if I'm interacting in a small group situation, a lot of times there's temptation that to be a proper member of the group, you should be talking at the same pace and as everyone else. And I have found that I'm a fantastic listener. And over the course of a conversation, a lot of things will process with me. And I might be the one to tie it all in a bow at the very end and really have something to say that helps in a really profound way as like a one-off versus just constantly adding to the volume of content that's happening.
Yeah, and we need to learn the strength of that
Yep.
because you're listening, but you're listening and likely you're putting together lots of different ideas to share what's most important. Or you're working with your client and you're listening and you're thinking about lots of different things, how to best help them. And we can really thrive in that. And something that I really was a light bulb moment for me was when I heard introverts think and then speak, and extroverts speak in order to think. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I used to lack confidence. I used to be shy. I I don't get I'm not nervous for podcasting. I'm not nervous for public speaking. But one thing I realize is I'm never going to speak as many words as an extrovert, and that's okay. But if you're judging people on the number of words that they say, I'm not going to be there.
Yep. We will be in the same place. We'll put it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
Yeah.
But and you may have had this experience. A lot of introverts, maybe they're not. They're taking it all in, and maybe it's the person running the meeting is like, Michelle, what do you think about that? Because they know you have something
Yeah.
valuable to say, and a lot of introverts have that experience, and just know that it's normal. You're taking it all in. You're thinking of your best response or what that situation needs, and it's normal. But we're not going to speak as many words as an extrovert. That's something that I realize, maybe even just recently.
Yeah. You don't have to take up the space.
Yeah. So, as an introvert, what's a strength that you feel like you have?
Oh, I think everything we were just talking about, without question, is understanding my place and how I can contribute the most value. And that's just something I've really embraced is knowing that not that I'm smarter than anyone in the room or any of that. I don't mean for it to sound that way, but like I'm probably going to have something really profound to say at the end of a conversation. And again, it's not because I'm smarter than everyone else. It's just how I've been processing things. So if I'm in a group of extroverts, they've all been throwing a bunch of stuff against a board, and I'm going to be the one who's probably going to bring it all together.
Yeah, and that's a brilliant strength.
Hmm.
It's a much longer story. I won't go into it all, but that's where the name Quiet and Strong came from. And it's not quiet meaning shy, it's just quiet thinking.
Yep.
And somebody told me that basically, when you have something to say, people are listening, and that's where the name came from. And it's not a shy thing. It's just I'm thinking, and it's good.
Yep.
I'm going to come up with something good. Just, let me think here.
Yeah. And on the flip side, if I'm put in an environment where I'm somehow forced to talk through it all, I'm going to say a bunch of gibberish the whole time and never come to anything good. Right. And so there's a little bit of, I think maybe education we could do or whatever for folks who maybe think that your lack of talking is a sign of disinterest or not engaging. I always hated like participation points in classes because you're just like, I don't have something to say throughout the class. Like ask me at the end to sum something up. And because you're not going to get anything of value if you're just asking me to throw things around in the middle, because I have no idea what I'm talking about at that point.
Yeah, I just felt a little dread from that when you said that from my college days, the participation.
100%. Yep. Yep.
Oh man. So let's talk a little bit more about, what you were speaking of on the podcast I heard, your course Networking That Pays.
Yeah, this is a funny one. I never expected this course to even exist. So I'll just tell you how it came to exist because I think it's interesting. I shared that my original background was in mass marketing and I did a lot of traffic-based marketing. And this is back in, 2005. So back in the day when that was just starting. And then when I got into founding this startup, I was in a situation where my customers were not going to sign up to an email list. They weren't going to respond to mass marketing. I was trying to sell to local government organizations and nonprofits. I was based in Denver at the time. I'm trying to sell into Philadelphia city government, Boston city government. They are not interested in hearing from someone from Denver, right? They're all very local places and understandably so. And so I was a little lost and I could not figure out how to make any gains because I was used to building an email list and mass marketing. Luckily, it occurred to me that I had very randomly taken 2 quarters of networking science classes when I was in business school. I'm still not sure how that all came together, but I'm so glad it did. And I learned that there's actually a science to how our networks work. And I got to reflecting on that and I developed a system for myself because as an introvert, I think that's one of the best things we can do is give ourselves assignments rather than just say, go meet people. And I used all the networking science that I had learned to kind of build a methodical system of how I could meet these people and then how they could become my customers. Fast forward, 5, 10 years, I had my own business. I was trying to help my clients turn their businesses around. Over and over and over again, I saw that the biggest thing in their way was they didn't have a good network. And so I jotted down my system into a Google document, started sharing it with my one-on-one clients. Some friends who had large programs got wind of it and said, can you come teach my people this? This looks really valuable. So I would go and guest teach. And then eventually a friend who has a very large program said, you know what, if you don't get this into a course that my people can buy, I'm going to steal all your material and do it myself. So she was kidding, of course, but not really. And so I just sat down and created the course out of it. And it's been a real joy because it is my belief that the same way we say you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, I can tell you, and I keep quoting different time frames, but I've been doing this work for 20, 25 years in some form or another. And I've seen over and over and over again that a small business is the average of its network. And so it is not acceptable to me if an introvert becomes a small business owner and then feels like they can't build a network because it's too important. And so this course is important to me because it makes it doable for introverts, and we can talk about why. But also the most surprising thing I found was that it also makes it more effective for extroverts. And it's interesting when you look at how both groups screw up networking, because I think that also helps introverts understand that extroverts aren't like some magical species that just gets this right out of the gate. They screw up a lot of things too. And having a system that helps both has been really rewarding and also really eye-opening.
Yeah, and that's funny that you say that because we all need to continuously improve and get better,
Yeah.
but the way is going to be different. So the extroverts aren't all perfect either, but just the way they network and the way an introvert would network are going to look different, and you need to learn what works best for you. But it's not that
Yeah.
extroverts necessarily have it all down.
No, they are wasting so much time, and it's really the exact same problem. It just looks differently. Introverts, if you don't have a system, just don't do it. And again, I've been there, like I get it. They just avoid it, scared of it. Extroverts just go to town and talk to anyone or everyone for 40 to 80 hours a week, have no clue who they're talking about, to what end, or anything. And so the end result for both is nothing, because extroverts are wasting all of their time talking to people who make no sense to talk to, but they just popped up. So sure, let's grab coffee. And introverts are doing nothing. And the summation of both of those things is nothing on both ends. But I think introverts allow themselves to feel bad because they see extroverts doing all this activity. It's kind of like what we were talking about posting on LinkedIn all day. They see all this activity and assume that it is ending in a lot of business or whatever. I can tell you it's not. And so let's just take that shame right off of it and just assume both groups are doing a terrible job of networking, because networking is just weird.
Yeah, I'm curious. You said you actually took a couple networking science classes.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything about introversion in that, or just it helped you understand and then you built the introversion part?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of introversion in it, but it helped. This is weird because I'm generally not a big science person, but understanding the science helped me build a system. And when I build a system, it is easier to follow. I understand what the rules are. I understand why I'm doing things. And more importantly, I have a reason for why I'm reaching out to people. And that made it doable for me. And I will say makes it doable for my students who are in this course, because a lot of the problem with introversion is when you're just dropped into a room or you're just dropped onto the internet and told, meet people. It's a sequence over strategy problem. There's 10 steps you should take before you get dropped into that space. And when we're just dropped in that space without any of that preparation, we panic, understandably, because I'm not getting into a small room and figuring out how to make small talk with people. But if I have an assignment and if I know what I'm there, honestly, I'm still probably going to skip the event because there are better ways to do it. But if I have a purpose for reaching out to someone, I can reach out to them. It's when I'm just told to vaguely go meet people that it gets real ugly.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like whatever form of networking, it's like, what's the purpose here? What's my
Yeah.
goal? And it's okay if my goal is different from that person's goal. What's my goal? And that's been really key for me too.
Yeah, and so we teach that, not only what is the goal, and we get very specific on that. It's not just a vague go make money or go find leads, because that's not specific enough for an introvert. But then we talk about like the very specific, like what are different strategies to get introduced to people that aren't weird and that you can figure out on your own. And again, give you an excuse to reach out to someone that's not just, hi, I'm Michelle, how are you today? Right? Like, let's put reasoning behind all the outreach that we do and allow you to make choices to reach out in ways that don't make you feel like you're getting in someone's way.
Yeah. So we've been talking about this, but just maybe summarize like why do we need to have a great network? And it might not be really big, but what's the purpose of it and how do we go about building that network?
I just think that we're social beings. And so if you're out there trying to build a business or you're trying to accomplish anything else, everything is going to be easier if there are a couple of people who have your back. And I don't just mean in a support way to keep cheering you on, although that's important. But it is going to be easier if you can collaborate on different things and bring together two different audiences. It is going to be easier if you are building relationships with people who work with your folks either right before or right after you, or even at the same time. The wedding industry is a perfect example of this. Every wedding caterer should know every wedding DJ in the area, should know every, photographer in the area, every event planner. Your lives just get easier. Because you can trade information, you can all work with the same clients, and it just makes life easier, whether you are selling one-to-one or even if you're selling mass market products. You can go, I call it borrowing an audience. If you're selling a mass market product and you can build a relationship with somebody who has an audience of people who might want that product, well, if you have a relationship, you can figure out how to collaborate in some way. And so you're not always starting from scratch, having to find all of your leads on your own. We're a collaborative world. And so thinking about networking as collaboration with other people who are trying to reach your same clients rather than networking in order to meet your clients is a real game changer. Right. We're looking to build long-term relationships with people who are trying to reach the same people you are in a non-competitive way. We're not trying to go meet our, future clients all the time. That's exhausting. That's like cold calling.
Yeah. And like we've been talking about, introverts are very good at building relationships one on one. But just sometimes the message is that that's not the right way. We need to do more. And what other obstacles are introverts facing when it comes to building a network?
A lot of it comes down to having confidence in how am I going to reach out and what am I going to do. And so when we're looking at the process, the first step we do is set a networking goal, just figure out what you're trying to do. Second step is to build what I call ideal connection avatar profiles. So a lot of us have talked about our client persona or our client avatar. You also have what I call ideal connection avatars. And this keys into what we were just talking about in terms of who are those groups or profiles of people that already have access to your clients. And let's profile that out because that's going to tell you who you should be building relationships with. So an example, a lot of times, if you're a service provider, it is looking at who's working with your clients right before or right after you. Those are great clues. I tell the story of I live in a pretty small town on Lake Michigan, and we had a really fun collaboration, and you wouldn't immediately see how they share clients, but they do. We have an axe throwing bar. We live in the Midwest, like we do axe throwing here. We pretend like we're from Canada sometimes. We had a new yoga studio in town open. So those two owners got together, and on a Friday night, everyone went and threw axes for an hour to get out the aggression of the week, and then walked over to the yoga studio a few doors down and had this long, just kind of meditation so that they could enter the weekend in a chilled way. And when you think about it, those are the same clientele. People who go out to an axe bar are also probably at yoga on Sunday mornings in a weird way. And so thinking through who are these people who already are my clients and doing some of these collaborations is really helpful. So when you know that ideal connection avatar, then you can start saying, okay, how should I reach out to them in a way that respects that we have something in common? And that outreach gets a lot easier if you were the axe bar owner who's like, cool, the yoga studio opened. Now I have a reason to go say, hey, we share the same clients. What could we cook up? Wouldn't that be fun? And that is such an easy conversation because it's a win-win conversation. It's not these awkward conversations we have when we haven't thought through that profile where you're just talking to anyone and everyone and trying to kind of hope that you figure out some sort of mutual benefit. And at the end, you just say, oh, how can I help you? And the other person says, how can I help you? And nobody has a really good idea and it goes nowhere. If you can think through who these profiles are of people who share your clients, that connection becomes so much easier because there's purpose behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're making these connections as an introvert. How do you build and continue to foster relationships? What's your tips on that?
Yeah, well, number one, we talk about what is the most effective way to actually build the initial connection. And I will tell you what it is in ROI order in terms of like what's the most successful. Most successful way is if you have a mutual connection who can introduce you. It's not always available, but if it is, that's the one you should use. The second is if you can create what I call a project of some sort. What do I mean by that? I mean, having an excuse to reach out to people because you're writing a white paper or because maybe you have a podcast and you can invite them to be a guest, something that is of value to the person you're reaching out to so that you're offering something before you're asking something of them. And this is how I ultimately solved my problem with my startup. I was in a situation where we had some media buzz, but I had no sales. So I could weirdly book any keynote that existed in my industry. I was in a very fortunate position there, and I acknowledge not everyone is, but I could not get anybody to have a sales conversation with me. So what I started doing was turning down the keynotes and asking for a panel instead. And then all those people who I needed to meet to get in the doors of my future clients, I asked them to come to these events. A lot of them, again, were nonprofits. They want to tell their story. They want to be featured. They feel like no one ever sees them. I was able to create a project where I had these panel discussions and I invited them and I said, please come tell your story. I'm going to facilitate a panel. And so I built a relationship that way before ever trying to sell anybody anything or asking for an introduction. And that's an extreme example. But we can all do that in different forms of our business. If you have a podcast, please, 50% of your guests should be used as a way to meet people who might be collaborators down the line. If you're a B2B consultant, you can write white papers. We do this a lot. That gives you an excuse to reach out to the people that you need to meet. There are ways to do that when you think about that project. And then the third way is something I call a thank you, where you're just reaching out to people and sincerely saying, hey, because I heard you say this publicly, so this is for people with public platforms, or even people who just post on social, because you said this the other week, you really got me thinking in this way, and thank you for that. And it's just a little more genuine than, hi, I'm Michelle, how are you? Can we have a virtual coffee? So those are the ways that, number one, we kind of give you an assignment to meet people and couch it under something of value. And then once you have met them and once you've built that connection, we have some other tricks where, we have catch up days and thank you days and different types of days where you can think through how to keep those connections alive.
Yeah. I heard somebody say once that they built relationships by rolling up their sleeves with somebody else. And so I just really relate to what you're saying. Like when you're working on something together, that's where you really get to know each other, especially as introverts. Like I'm not going to make great connections just making small talk here and there.
Exactly.
I've learned to get better at it. I usually don't love it. I know it's a way to get to the deeper conversations I want to have, but working alongside someone in some way is a great way to go. And I mean, that's why I love my podcast. This is a form of networking for me. I meet so many great people like yourself. It's amazing.
Exactly. And that's such a great starting point and such a strong starting point because also introverts are great when you can spend time with people. And so us having a conversation, the meaty conversation here, that tie is going to be a little bit harder. And then related to that, something that introverts struggle with is making an ask. And so I do a lot of encouraging of learning about small, tiny asks, because that is how relationships are built. Again, humans are wired for connection and for helping each other. And so I think introverts are more prone to being scared and to waiting because they have this like big ask of what they eventually want to do with this person hanging over them. And so it becomes how much small talk, how much follow up do I need to do before I can ask the big thing? And I say, start asking from day one, but just tiny stuff, right? Because that builds relationships. So you can just reach out and say, hey, I was thinking of option A or option B. Is there one that's better? Or, hey, I'm going to do this. What am I missing? Is there a big red flag here? So once you've made a connection with someone, you can ask them tiny little favors. And that actually really, really builds the connection. And also people get really weird when you don't ask for anything. So if you just keep trying to follow up with people get uncomfortable with that. And I use myself as an excuse because I'm not great at this. And I have these great neighbors next door and they ask me for favors all the time. And I don't think twice about it. And I do it. They work long hours. I work from home. I can go grab a package. Like I just don't think anything of it, but I don't ask for help from them very often. I grew up independent, whatever. I forget. And my neighbor said to me once, she said, I'm so scared to ask you for anything because I feel bad because you never ask for the favor in return. And I felt awful. And I realized like when you don't ask people for things, it actually hurts the relationship. So it's thinking through what are those little things that you can ask for and knowing that people aren't judging you for it, but it's actually a relationship builder.
Yeah. And sometimes maybe you have a particular expertise. And when people aren't asking you about it, it could feel like, hey, why didn't you ask me about that? I could have helped you with that.
Exactly. And I think we think in such extremes of that ask. We think it either has to be, can I borrow your brain for an hour? Or, hey, I have this whole collaboration and I just met you, but let's talk about partnering on something. And those can feel like too much, but then we default to doing nothing. And it's like there are little tiny asks, that take people less than 30 seconds that can build relationships along the way.
Yeah. Any other tips just on the long term of building relationships, especially as an introvert?
You know what? My other one is I started calling it this. I don't know why, but stop, drop, and thank you. And that's just a rule I have for myself and encourage everyone who comes around me to do. And that is whenever you think of someone, thank them for that moment. So I have this ridiculous dog who needs like 3 hours of walks a day. So as I'm walking this dog, I will remember a project I did with somebody, or I'll have a flashback to a business dinner we had, or a conversation we had, or I will think through something, a question will pop into mind for someone. And I don't allow those things to be fleeting. I make a little note of it. Now it's become very natural to me. I don't even have to make a note of it. I come back to my desk and I immediately send an email or a text that is nothing more than, hey, I was walking Watson. I remembered that time we talked about this and it just made me laugh. Like, thanks for being here. And those go so far because nobody does that. And so, as introverts, that's one of our powers. We do remember interactions with people, they matter to us. And so, if we can just remember to tell people that, it really, really solidifies relationships because it goes back to what we're saying. Like, we're always observing and listening. And extroverts don't remember any of those details, but we remember things that happened 2 years ago. And we can come back and say, hey, this morning I was working on a project and it reminded me of a conversation I had 2 years ago. I am so grateful for that thing you told me because I'm realizing it stuck with me. And that goes so far. So I've turned that into stop, drop, and thank you. If somebody crosses your mind for having had an experience that helped you, tell them. It takes less than 30 seconds. Shoot off a text, shoot off an email, however you communicate with them.
Yeah, I love that. Stop, drop, and thank you. And you were kind of saying this before. Also be specific, say
Yeah.
something that's meaningful to them. It's not just, hey, you did great on this thing. It's say something that you really got from that interaction.
Absolutely. I make that comparison. We see so many people trying to connect by posting on social media, like in response to a post, they'll say, oh, thanks, I needed to hear this today. Nobody is going to remember that.
Yeah,
But
what
if
did
you
you need to
say,
hear? What did you need to hear
yeah,
today?
what did you need to hear and what did you take out of it? That does not take any extra time to say, but the person will remember it.
Yeah, yeah, because
Because nobody else, it's kind of like sticking out like a sore thumb, but in a good way. Because nobody takes the effort, and extroverts sure aren't taking the effort. So if we're talking about introvert superpowers, you have that 30 extra seconds to give a specific answer, and that one is going to stick.
yeah, very good. Michelle, this time has gone by fast.
Oh, it
Um,
has.
and
Look at
it's
it.
been
Yeah.
a great conversation. Is there anything else that you want to add today?
I don't think so, other than to pump everyone up and like, this is possible. You can build a network if it feels difficult. I get it. It's understandable. I mean, I am the first one to hide in the bathroom if you plot me into an event, but it's doable, and know that it's doable. If you get a little bit of a process, answer some of these questions we've talked about today, it is possible.
Yeah, and I'll just add, like we've been talking about, it's not that you can't do it, that you don't want to do it, but often using your introverted strengths, honoring your introverted needs, that's where success is going to be. And that path may look different from somebody else in your life, honoring yourself, using your strengths, that's where you're going to be successful.
100%. Could not agree more.
All right. And of course, where can people find out more about the great work that you do?
Yeah, you can visit my website at themichellewarner.com. Somebody else has michellewarner.com buried, so I had to throw the in front of it.
Okay.
And you can always find me on LinkedIn and the Sequence Over Strategy podcast if you want to check that out. There are some different episodes on certainly on networking and a lot of other topics.
All right. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you. I hope you take the time to explore other episodes and learn from other amazing guests. Remember, if you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the four-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link in the show notes. And I'd love to connect with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media for Quiet and Strong and much more. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. So many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.